Okay. Mayor Petro is in another meeting. She'll be out shortly, but she asked me to go ahead and get started so that we hopefully can stay on time. It looks like the first thing tonight is the council member reports. Anybody have any reports?
Just
Any
that the
mic.
lights are lit.
Just pick any mic.
Oh, sorry.
So the chamber had its legislative meeting this morning, and they finalized all of the different legislative priorities. And so if anybody's interested in what those are, I'll let you know. But there's quite a few. Some they already know they're not going to support. And then the communities that cares, we had our final core work group. Sorry, this isn't going to work. Core work group meeting yesterday, and we will be moving into forming the two cores, one at Layton High and one at Northridge High. And we have both principals on board with us, and we're going to start putting the community boards together in January and getting them trained and everything. So it's moving forward really good. We've got a lot of support from community members for this program.
Okay, now Councilman Thomas.
Sorry. The lights are lit out in the park. Go see them. 6 to 11. Is that right, Dave? Or dusk to 11. Yeah. And you can see them during the day too. They're a lot wider then. They're not as sparkly, but you can still see them.
Clint? Okay, I don't have anything either. So next thing is councilman training. Gary.
I'll make a motion. We take a break.
It's called saunter. You saunter, isn't that right? Isn't that what they call it up at the legislature?
Oh, is it a song?
Whenever they get bored with your testimony, they say, I move that we saunter. So whatever
Okay,
that
I
means.
move we saunter then.
Okay, so thanks, Chad, for bringing that up. Bring up the next page just for a sec. A little down. Yeah, so this is a map, and you notice the map. If you've ever, I was going to have you go onto your cell phone and pull up just the map, the Google map, and then put in where you want to go. And it always gives you 3 or 4 choices, but the darkest line is the best choice, right? It's always the shortest line. Take a look at this one. If you've never been to Hell's Canyon, you know that it's exactly that to get there on the 4 hour 15-minute route. It's a long ways. Right behind that tree is just, it looks like a little piece of road that accounts for an hour's drive. And every time you bring a direction or request a direction on your Google phone, you're going to get options. And the best option is the dark blue option. And so what we want to talk about tonight a little bit is just the dark blue option. The dark blue option is always, in my opinion, as an attorney, and the best thing I could advise you is stick to your ordinances. Stick to the processes that have been outlined for you. They've been outlined for a purpose. The reason they're outlined for a purpose is because if you don't follow them, you get into all kinds of trouble. Everything from just a massively ugly hearing all the way to a massively ugly lawsuit. And so stick to your ordinance. That's your safety zone. That's your blue line. That's your direct line to just focus on those and focus on the processes that state law has outlined for you. And that's what we're trying to educate you a little bit on. Tonight I want to talk about the general plan. It used to be called master plans. Dave says to say something at least halfway entertainment, halfway through. But I thought your comment earlier was entertaining about the guy with the shirt. I thought that was good. Or mine.
Sure.
Early. Yeah.
Are you going to tell them?
Yeah, you go ahead and tell him.
No, I think you should. You're the lawyer.
I don't remember that one.
It's a blue line that points to you.
That's it. The lawyer's the...
Years ago, we went to the League of Cities soiree, whatever you want to call it. And they had a guest speaker. And he got up and he says, hey, I'm nobody. I haven't done anything great in my life. He says, but I invented this mantra. Mantra?
Mantra.
And people seem to like it. And he says, and they want me to speak places because of it. And he says, so here it is. And the mantra was shut up quit your whining and get on with life. And he says, and I've got shirts I'll sell to you after. He says, because everybody here knows somebody that they could give that to. But I want you to know one thing. When you put the shirt on, it's upside down. He says, because most of you out here are the ones that deserve this shirt. So anyway.
I thought
Okay,
that
that
was
was it.
That was good.
It's over too.
And mine was Dave Church's greatest expression, and that was, there is one nut on every council. If you don't know who that is, it's you. So contemplate deep thoughts for the evening. No, we're not taking a vote on this. It's not whether you know your neighbor is. So anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about general plan because I think it'll clear up probably some of the issues. Whenever you come to a zoning decision, the most important decision you're going to make is based on something that you've done a long time before the zoning decision ever comes to you, and that's called the creation of the general plan. And how many years, Don, did it take to get the general? 5 years to actually amend and Clint was involved in it as a planning commissioner, and many of you attended meetings, and Tom, you were at many of those meetings as well. You put a lot of work into that general plan, and the general plan has several aspects that are all defined by state code and says you have to have these provisions in there on transportation, on parks, on densities, on housing, that type of thing. There's a housing element that you have to have in there. So you've spent a lot of time putting that plan together. That's your blue line, and the blue line is the safety line. The map, the general plan consists of two things. These are just the high points of what the general plan includes, but it consists of both a text piece, which tells you the types of uses that you can have in that zone, gives you some ideas as to how you might allocate those uses, those types of things. But it also contains a map, and that map and the text are both adopted by ordinance, so they carry the weight of an ordinance. In the state of Utah, general plans are not mandatory. In other words, you don't have to follow your general plan. However, that's not to say that there's not a consequence for not following your general plan. The general plan is a perfect rational basis for your zoning decisions. If you were to say nothing else at the end of your zoning decision except because it is consistent with my general plan, that's enough to sustain your decision in a court of law. And if you vote against your general plan, that's when you get into problems. Because voting against your general plan usually constitutes, in other words, putting into place a zone that is contrary to your general plan, usually means that you're spot zoning. And spot zoning means that you're usually making a decision. Clint has listened to the presentation on implicit bias. You're usually making a decision based on emotion rather than on actual analysis or actually analyzing decision. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference between making a zoning decision based on emotion, a zoning decision based on the analysis of your general plan. And so zoning without or against your general plan, just remember that whenever you're zoning against the general plan, you should immediately think to yourself, this is a spot zone unless I change the general plan, unless there's a motion and an ordinance to change the general plan. And then there are only two reasons basically for changing your general plan, other than going through the process that you went through to do it citywide, to change your plan citywide. And that is, when you're actually changing the general plan, you ought to ask yourself two questions. First question is whether or not there was a mistake in the general plan that you put together. Because sometimes when you do a citywide plan, you don't do it quickly, but you do it and you missed something. And if there's a definite mistake, oh my heavens, there's a low density residential right in the middle of all this commercial. How did that get there? Why do we do that? And the second reason is because the surrounding area has changed over time to such a degree that it demands that this property be zoned something else or be master planned for something else. Two reasons for changing your general plan. Any zone change that comes to you that is inconsistent with your general plan will also come with an amendment to the general plan. It may come on the same night. It may come on a separate occasion. But the neat thing about that is your very first decision is whether or not this property should be changed. The general plan on this property should be changed. You can set everything else aside. You can set what the developer is doing aside. You can set everything else aside, and you just can isolate yourself to a very, very 36,000 foot level decision. And that is when you've got a request for a general plan change, because you know there's an upcoming zone change, the first decision you make is whether or not that general plan needs to be changed at that location. And if the answer is no, the Blue Road, you've got a decision on the zoning when it comes in, because you don't want to zone contrary to your general plan. If you do, you're in trouble. Generally, you're gonna be in trouble. And so, I think that's all probably I wanted to present to you tonight on the general plan. But are there any questions on that, on the general plan and how that works? It is your map. It is your most direct route. And if you're ever voting on anything that is against the general plan, you're probably outside of the parameters of what's legal. So, questions? Now, just so you know, okay, I'm not going to deal with the issue of the last zoning decision, but the way that the planning department will work is if they get a negative vote in the planning commission, okay, state law only requires that you have one hearing, and they require that the planning commission make a recommendation to the council. Typically, staff will not bring a master plan, especially where the master plan needs to be changed and the zoning needs to be changed. If the planning commission has said no on it, they're not going to bring those two things to you. And so last week you didn't see two ordinances. You didn't see a master plan change ordinance and you didn't see a zone change ordinance, did you? All you saw was a discussion on the planning commission's negative recommendation. If you had said, if you would say that night, we agree with the planning commission, the situation's over. We agree with their recommendation. If you said, we would rather the planning commission bring this forward with a recommendation, with an actual ordinance, staff bring it forward with an actual ordinance so that we consider whether or not we want to change it at our level, at the city council level, because we think A, there was a mistake in the general plan, or B, the area has changed such that everything around it looks like what this person's asking for, the change in the general plan that this person's asking for. So that's the way that the process works in Layton. And I hope this is helpful, because this is a big deal. This is like the foundation to a home, or the footings. It's the footings. And as long as you guys got a good grasp on this, and you do, most of you have been to planning commission meetings. Some of you have been to multiple years of planning commission meetings, but you know how important the master plan is and following your master plan is. And you only get into trouble when you fall outside of that circle. So any other questions that you've got regarding the general plan? Okay, no? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I wasn't as entertaining as Dave. I promised David would be.
Thank you, Gary. Looks like next up we have Dave Price, I think, with the amphitheater.
Council, this evening I'm pleased to acknowledge a pledge of financial support from the Jewel Kenley family, Jewel Kenley and her family. We've been working on this with the family for quite a while. The Kenley family have supported Layton City, the Davis Arts Council, and the performing arts in Layton for many years. The Kenley family generously supported the construction of the Ed Kenley Centennial Amphitheater 25 years ago at the time of its construction, and have been a consistent sponsor of the Davis Arts Council since that time. Jewel Kenley and her family have pledged $25,000 a year for the next 10 years. These donations will amount to a total of $250,000 at the end of that time. Each year, for the next 10 years, the Kenley family has pledged to donate $10,000 to the Davis Arts Council for their continued support of the arts in Layton, and to donate $15,000 to the city in support of the plaza, the maintenance thereof, and the amphitheater and those productions. We are so grateful to be able to partner with a family and an individual, Jewel, who has been with us from day one in arts in our community. And just thrilled to be able to continue to work with her and her accountants as we figure out the exact mechanisms to make this happen. But she is prepared to make that first donation this month, and we'll move forward from then. The city is, as a demonstration of our gratitude, we've put together, some things that will help her and her family understand our appreciation. So just wanted to update you on that and let you know where we are. Any questions?
Yeah, I would just like you to kind of explain what the naming will be over there and that kind of stuff, if you can.
The things that we're looking at right now, the Davis Arts Council has committed quite a few items that they're willing to help recognize the family for, and so items that are published on their programs and at their concerts will mention the Kenley family's generous support. We will not mention the dollar amounts of those things, but we'll just have an acknowledgement of their support. We also will put the Kenley family, Ed and Jewel, as major sponsors on the signage that has been started out there right now, along with Layton City, the Ramp Commission, and Davis County as the major sponsors of that plaza. And then we are interested in calling the plaza the Ed Kenley Plaza and having some signage on the plaza itself, on the roof line of the plaza, to match the signages at the Heritage Museum entrance, as well as the entrance to the amphitheater.
Good job.
Well,
It's a neat, they have.
yeah,
They've been there forever and helped them, and to add that to it, I think that's great. I know they're starting to call it the Kenley. That's has nothing to do with anything, but
yeah,
that's just patrons. Yeah, but I think the Ed Kenley Plaza. You'll put a sign. Did I miss that?
we'll put a sign at the top of the roof line
Oh,
of the plaza
oh, the
itself.
plaza there. That's good.
It will be hung similar to the gate structures, if you go
Good.
out there and see those right now. But it's just such a wonderful match, and to have the family step up and make such a generous offer, we were thrilled to be able to work with them. And such a, from Jewel down through the family, great people.
So Dave, in the past, we also talked about other minor sponsors. Have you had any progress in that or not, or?
We have not. We came to a point this spring where we felt that just with COVID and everything that's going on with the business climate, we felt uncomfortable making those requests of businesses and things like that. And so we really concentrated on this major donation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, I guess next up is Chad Wilkins. He's going to talk about the Layton Municipal Code.
Thanks, Mayor, Council. This is actually a discussion, a continued discussion about the home occupation standards. So let me pull those up real fast here. Oh, my mouse is taking it right off over here. I'm going to try to keep my comments pretty brief tonight because we've already talked about this during a previous work session. But since the last time we spoke to the council about this, we have taken it back to the Planning Commission for their final recommendation. They had asked us to make some changes, so they had actually continued it from the original hearing one meeting. They met on Tuesday last week on the 24th. Came up with a couple of additional changes that they're actually reflected in your packet. They were changes they'd asked for before. We talked through those a little bit, but just to go through this really, really briefly, and hopefully this mouse is gonna, I think we're gonna be okay. Let me just get the slideshow started so it's a little bit bigger. We're just on that cusp of being a little bit too far away for this mouse to work well, but we'll give it a shot. I'm going to go through those slides real quick. We'll cover that in council meeting. One of the questions that came up from the council at our last work meeting was related to high impact, low impact, the collection of signatures. That was a process that was a major part of the discussion of the Planning Commission as well. And just to be brief, one of the concerns that came up was about collecting signatures from neighbors. Does that create a hardship for an applicant? And also, does that create a hardship for a neighbor if they maybe don't want to sign for some reason, but they feel like they're compelled to so they can keep the peace with the neighbor? We talked through that quite a bit at Planning Commission. We feel like, we can create a form that will allow someone to either contact staff directly if they have a concern, or, that would allow for that other process. And I think that was one thing that was really important at the Planning Commission discussion, is that the signature collection process is a way to streamline that application. But, if a neighbor doesn't want to sign, that their neighbor can still come in and request that conditional use permit and go through the Planning Commission, still have that exact same process that they could have had anyway, and get that approved. And as you remember, conditional use means it's an allowed use. So you'd really be looking at conditions that would be added, not necessarily saying no, but saying these are the things that limits to hours, visitors, requiring, extra off-street parking, those kind of things would be the potential conditions to ameliorate any of those or mitigate any of those potential impacts from the use. So the end of that, I guess the resolution of that discussion at the Planning Commission was that we'll make sure that we put our pencils, to the paper and get a good form that allows people. One idea was that that it's a piece of paper that the applicant gives to the neighbor and then they send it in to us, rather than having to come in with a signature sheet with all the signatures on. We're toying with that a little bit, trying to figure out what the best way to do that. But that was the way that we settled that during the Planning Commission discussion, is that staff will come up with a good process that will allow for fair participation by everybody. When I say we're going to come up with it, what that means is you've got the process in your packet. This is just coming up with a form that implements that process. One other quick thing. Did you have a question, Mayor?
No, I was just going to suggest, I know that you guys have gone online with, the building process. Why wouldn't this just kind of be like that? Why couldn't you make an online portal for just that neighborhood to come in and comment? And that way that eliminates any type of, confrontation with your neighbor without them knowing.
Yeah.
Because
Great idea.
they wouldn't know who is who on their comment, but yet, it's up to that applicant to let the neighbors know that they're applying.
That's a great idea. I think that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, and that's the kind of thing we talked about at Planning Commission. So one other thing I wanted to add, we've had a couple of comments, a couple of suggestions for some typographical and grammatical type changes, both from the Planning Commission and from members of council. We're going to take those and make those changes. These are clarification and punctuation for the most part. One, though, that we wanted to bring up that we thought was important for the council to see was that there was a suggestion made that we include annual renewal just as a part of that very first part of the ordinance. We've included that, so you can see that highlighted there, that they have to get the business license and then annually renew that business license. Going through this, going to go very quickly through these items. We talked about this quite a bit last time. The one thing I will add is that there was a question last time about outdoor storage. That was added to the Planning Commission's language, that there's no outdoor storage allowed. You're only allowed to store things that are associated with the business, either in an enclosed vehicle, a trailer, some type of a structure. We'll talk about that in just a minute. That could include an accessory structure or the garage, but that was added to the Planning Commission and is included in your packet. The other one, just again remind you that there are some businesses that we feel are not appropriate as a home occupation because of their marked tendency to expand beyond the bounds of what we think a home occupation ought to be. A lot of people start out, really with good intentions, but just by the nature of these uses, they have a tendency to expand beyond what a home occupation should be. We talked about that a little bit last time. that's the list. And if you have any other ones you'd like to add or any other concerns, we can talk about that as well. One other item that came up is the idea of this indoor storage. Right now, the code does not allow any storage of materials in conjunction with a home occupation business within a garage or an accessory structure. We have a lot of people that have asked for some. They say, you know, we don't need a lot, but we have, you know, as an example, a contractor that does floors may want to store a couple boxes of tile in their garage. And right now, it's just no. We don't allow that. Just to give you a little idea of our process that might help with as we discuss about this, when an application is submitted for a home occupation, it's reviewed by a planner first. And the planner looks at these standards. They'd look at the existing standards, they'll look at these new standards and make sure that that home occupation meets those standards. If they don't meet the standard, then either the application has to be modified or they're told that it's just not going to work, that they need to, you know, that they're not going to be able to get approved. So with that being said, we did feel that there was an opportunity, though, to have some minimal storage within an accessory structure and within the garage, particularly where you have large garages where you may have a third car garage that already exceeds our minimum parking standard. The one key to that is that the language specifically says that you cannot replace the required parking area, the required covered parking area with this storage. So Tim put together a couple of illustrations that show what that looks like on our typical minimum 2-car garage standard, 20 by 20. You can see that space shown, that you could potentially have some area around the perimeter. He shows up to 150 square feet. Obviously, you don't have to go to 150 square feet, but that would be the maximum that you could do in that scenario. And then another one with a 3-car garage scenario, 15 by 10 is essentially what 150 square feet works out to be. That's not quite a full space. You know, it's our full space would be 10 by 20 approximately. So you've got a little extra room there. And that's the intent of it. And a lot of the changes that we've recommended is really intending to provide some additional flexibility for these businesses, but do it within what we feel is a reasonable amount without taking up too much of that space. So that gives you a couple of different examples. They could also, with the new proposal, use up to 300 square feet of an accessory structure, and that's up to. They're still going to be subject to all the limits on the size of accessory structures that need permits and all those types of things. So that's something that came up at the Planning Commission. It was expressed by some of our council members. So that's just kind of the way we looked at that. I think that's about it. That we talked about all these other issues at the last meeting. I don't want to necessarily recover the ground that we covered last time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have had as you've read through the ordinance.
Council, do you have any questions here? Or concerns?
Chad, after reading this again, the only question I have is on the number of vehicles that they can have, number 7 on page 7.
Okay.
So the no more than 2 vehicles at, you know, one weight and another vehicle at one weight and another vehicle or trailer at another weight. Can they have all of those?
No, it's an either or. So you could have.
Because it says and.
Let me grab that language real quick.
Between B and C, it specifically says and.
That's on. What was the page number again?
Page 8 for that particular comment, but on the bottom of page 7. So page 7, the 2 vehicles with the maximum gross weight of 10,000 is a semicolon. Doesn't say or and or whatever. But when you go to B, 1 vehicle with a gross weight of 14 and 1 trailer.
So the and between the trailer is correct. That's the way that was intended to be. I think we've got a transcription error on the other one. That should say or between A and B. There should be and that's the way that was presented to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So that should be an or between the 2 less than 10,000 square foot and the 14,000. But it was meant to allow for them to have a trailer as well. So they could.
But not all 4 vehicles.
But not all 4 of them.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And the length of the trailer was specified no longer than 20 feet, correct?
Yep, that's right.
How did you arrive at 20 feet? Just,
You know, that's actually a standard that I guess is based on some of those weight limits as we looked at some of those gross vehicle weight standards that, you know, that's kind of a ballpark. I'm not going to try to say that it was a scientific thing, but we looked at the size of a trailer that would accommodate that basic weight that we're looking at, that 14,000. So it's also, when you look at a typical RV, you're getting into that kind of category of length. So trying to make it, the idea behind the home occupation standards is that it shouldn't be very much different than what you could expect to see with just a home, right? So if you have an RV or a trailer stored there, that would be a typical size. When you get much past 20 feet, you start to talk about commercial trailers and things that are, when I say commercial, I'm talking about something that would hold a backhoe or a piece of equipment that really wouldn't be appropriate for a home.
Well, the 20 feet, if I remember right, that was to include the tongue. So technically, they're probably only a maximum of an 18-foot trailer.
It excludes the tongue. So that's,
Oh,
you'd be able to have 20
excludes?
feet plus. Yeah, it excludes the tongue.
Okay.
Yep, wanted to
I
check
misread
that.
that.
Yep.
Okay.
Question, Chad, the process for the signatures, just trying to think through that. If I'm a business owner, I want to get my business license, and there's the opportunity to streamline the process by grabbing these signatures from my neighbors. And if I'm not in control of that process, then how long does that time, this is probably too in the weeds, you said you figured this out, but if I'm waiting for my neighbors, not knowing if they're going to either say yes or say no, whether it's online or if I'm not in control, if I don't have that piece of paper saying, here, I'm in a hurry, I want to get this done, I go to my neighbors and now I know. If it's not that, if the business owner is not in control of that process and it's something outside that you want the neighbors to either call or text or email, how long do you think that time should be before it's like, yep, let's just go?
Yeah, I think we haven't ruled out the idea of still a signature sheet. I mean, we're trying to work through that ourselves, but we'd have to give a reasonable time. Probably between 5 and 10 days or something like that, which would be about the time you'd have to wait for a conditional use permit hearing anyway. So, as far as getting that organized and getting on an agenda. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I think we'd have to come up with a time that they'd have some type of time to respond. That's not to say, again, I don't know that we've ruled out that just having a signature sheet. I think not everyone on the planning commission shared that same concern. And I think that for the most part, maybe this will help as well. Most of our home occupation applications are low impact, by far and away. I mean, we do have contractors, we do have other folks that would classify as a high impact, but most of them that I see, and I sign off on all these, they're folks that are consultants that have nobody come to their home. They may have off-site employees, but no employees that come on site. They're people that are one operator type situations where they're catering or they're providing consulting services off-site. They just have a home office. That's the vast majority of what we see. So most of these are going to be in that low impact and not going to require this process at all. And the idea, again, is not, if someone knows that they've got a neighbor that is not going to give them a signature, they can just come directly to us and say, hey, let's skip the middleman. I just want to go directly to the planning commission on this. And then those folks would have a chance to go through that public process and submit any kind of comments. And again, most of the time, my experience with this, having been in a community with a similar process, was that most of the time it's not difficult to get the signatures. The neighbors are able to go and talk to their neighbors about it. It's a person that's says, I'm going to have a couple clients coming to the house, a barber or a beauty shop. And it's generally sometime, well, the two examples that I can think of where we couldn't get the signatures was somebody that was a bad actor that needed to have a public hearing, you need to have some specific conditions to say you can't do those things anymore. And the neighbors were upset because they weren't being a good neighbor.
So you just mentioned something that if the neighbor, they'd have an opportunity to say something in a planning commission meeting, how would they know? Out in the community, we put up the boards and
Yeah, same notices for
we're
a
talking about
conditional
doing
use
that in
permit.
neighborhoods,
Yep,
putting up
yep.
a board and saying,
It'd be the same notice process for a conditional use permit. Yep. So we'd give the notice. It's a posting right now. So
So on the one that talks about, well, most of the ordinance talks about per client and you don't have overlap of clients and stuff like that. But when we're talking the home instruction, specifically swimming lessons or dance lessons, that's multiple people. That's high impact. Will that automatically trigger a conditional use? Or how do you limit or identify the number of students? Because that's not specified anywhere in this ordinance.
yeah, that's one of those cases where it is a high impact, and it would be either something that we'd look at administratively if they can get the signatures of their neighbors, or would go to the planning commission. In either case, those conditions on a high impact could apply, where we could limit the hours of operation, the number of clients on site at a certain time. Pools in particular are one of those uses that, people tend to show up all at once and then go away all at once, and you have quite a few cars that come at one time. Sometimes parents will even wait for their child as they're having their swim lessons. So that's one that's, it's going to require some review, some reasonable conditions of approval to make sure that they've accounted for parking and accounted for those visitors. And that's one of those, that's a good example of a high impact. It's going to have an impact on the neighborhood. We recognize that. So we want to make sure there's a process to review those impacts and add some conditions as needed.
Well, if it's reviewed internally, is there some guidelines as to number of students per square feet or number of students per the size of the swimming pool? Or is this arbitrary? You decide, and then 2 years down the road, you're gone and somebody else takes your job and they decide it can be not as many or more students? Or does it force a conditional use to identify or limit the number of students?
It's still a conditional use. It just changes the land use authority. So it's
Okay.
either the director or designee acting as that conditional use land use authority, or the planning commission, but there's still that same ability to apply conditions. And, certainly in that case, we're going to be looking at just the same things you mentioned. We're going to make sure that they have enough parking. It's not, for us, we take that very seriously. And there's oftentimes we've had to tell people the number of clients you're proposing per day is too many. Okay. And it's going to have an impact. What we're looking at, again, is trying to keep it so it's not that much different than just a typical home, right? On the frequency of visitors. And so there is a little bit of discretion, I think, needed, because some people have a different business model than others. Our planning commission actually brought up that there are people that they know of that do most of their business on a Saturday with very little during the week. So saying, a certain number per day may not work for those folks. It may be better to do a limit per week. So I think having some of that flexibility will help in those situations where it's not, I guess what I'm trying to say is not all of those situations are the same, and people's business models are a little bit different. And, if they do have someone that teaches all their piano lessons on a Saturday, having a per day rate may not be as good as having a per week rate cap, if that makes sense. And some of those things that they do may be quicker. Barber may have, if you have a person cutting hair that predominantly cuts young children's hair, or someone that's fairly quick, as opposed to, sitting down for an hour per appointment, then that's going to change things as well. So those are the kinds of things the planning commission brought up as well, is how do you come to that number of clients? And I think that really has to do with having a little bit of discretion in there, but also recognizing that we have to have some appropriate limits on the number of clients and vehicles.
Yeah, because I don't have a problem, or I don't think we can limit the number of, per day or per week or whatever. I'm concerned about at that time. Can swimming lessons only have 8 students? Can the dance studio only have 8 students? Because those are not your single use. You don't have one client at a time for that.
Yeah.
You might, for musical instruction or voice lessons or something, have 1 student, but when you're starting to talk dance and swimming, you're going to have a handful or more.
So our hope would be that they would talk to their neighbors about what they want to do. They would, if they can work that out, they get that signature process. If not, it goes to a planning commission decision. And we're going to look at things like, a good example of this is on a cul-de-sac. That's going to be different than on a through street where you have lots of on-street parking available. So we're going to have to look at those things, and we will. We have that process already in place where we scrutinize these pretty hard. And I can tell you the applicants would tell you that we scrutinize these. And we have some experience with that also with our current ordinance limiting to 0 non-resident employees. We've had to tell people no. And that's one of the reasons why we brought this forward, is to change that. So any other questions? I thought I saw your hand, Dave. Did you raise it?
Right here.
Okay, good. Okay.
Just a technicality maybe, Chad.
Yeah.
Generally, a conditional use permit stays with the property. Will these stay with the property if that person happens to move, or will it be the new person have to come in and apply again?
Yeah, that's a great question. This one's a little bit different because there's an annual review of the business license. So I think the answer is yes, but we'd also have an annual review of whether or not they're meeting those conditions of approval. And if they discontinue the use for more than a year, then it goes away anyway. So, yep.
Okay. Ready to move on?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chad. We appreciate that. Okay, Mr. Cole, I guess Steve Jackson's going to take the drinking water discussion here. Sorry.
Mayor and Council, it's good to be with you tonight. Just wanted to give you a fairly high-level informational session here about our drinking water source protection plans. I don't know if all of you are familiar with them, and they don't come up a lot in our public meetings because they do contain some sensitive information that we don't really post for the public. It's available if somebody wants to come look at it, but we don't put it out on the internet or anywhere just to have out there because it does contain information about our drinking water sources and some of the things we're doing to protect them. So just for everybody's information, we have 5 wells. I think we've talked about that before in our previous meetings, and part of the requirements for the state of Utah to be a public water system is that we have to implement and maintain a public water drinking source protection plan. We call them the DWSP for short, so there's a bunch of acronyms, but I'll try not to bore you with all of those. But basically what that plan requires is back in, I think, 1993, they established the drinking water source protection rule, and then they gave us a few years to get a plan implemented. So in 1995-96, we had our plans created with a couple updates in 2008 and 2014. In 2014, we combined all of our sources into a single plan. It identifies each source individually, but it is now considered one plan instead of 5 separate plans. So updates to the plan are required every 6 years. That happens to be this year. So we are planning to submit this update by the end of December to be in compliance. And the 3 key components of the plan are that we delineate drinking water source protection zones, that we identify potential contaminant sources, which we call PCSs, within those zones, and then we develop a management plan to manage the existing PCSs and then any future PCSs that are out there. So really quickly, what are the drinking water zones that we established? So we use computer modeling software, groundwater modeling software to come up with where groundwater moves. It's pretty complex, and the computer models do a fantastic job for us, but there's 4 zones for every source that we have. The first zone is a 100-foot radius from the source, and so that one's pretty easy. You just map the source and draw a circle 100-foot radius around it. The other ones use the modeling software, and we use what we call a time of travel calculation to come up with the 250-day time of travel, the 3-year time of travel, and the 15-year time of travel for potential contaminants if they were to enter the groundwater system. How long would it take for that contaminant to reach the source and potentially be an issue? So an example of that, I'm not going to show you our actual maps because they do have that sensitive information, but as you can see, zone 1 is not shown because it is pretty simple to identify our well, but zone 2 is this red one, zone 3 is that orange one, and then zone 4 is that blue one. So you can see they get bigger as they go out. So what does that look like for all of our sources? The city, that's a conglomeration of all 5 wells and all of the well zones from zone 1 through 4 for the whole city. So it covers quite a bit of the city with these zones. And what that means is that we have a lot of work to do to make sure that any potential contaminant sources are not introduced into our groundwater. We've had some neighbors to the south in Woods Cross that have had a potential or a source of contamination from an old dry cleaner in it, and they watched it slowly move for years through their city, and then they eventually had to spend a lot of money on cleaning it up with water treatment plants. So we're trying to avoid that because that's what the whole plan is about. So they're assessed and inventoried every time we update this plan. These PCS locations and our city ordinances 1311 and 1920 contain the requirements and limitations for these PCSs in those zones. They're categorized into those 3 categories. So there's permitted uses, which means that it's considered relatively low, and as long as they follow best management practices and current laws and codes for storage of chemicals, they're permitted in the zone. Conditional uses are ones where it's considered relatively low, but there may be certain conditions that have to be placed on them in order to be able to locate in that zone. And then there's prohibited uses, which are just not allowed. So it's kind of hard to see. This is in our, it's table, I think, 20-1 in our section 19, but it lists some of those PCSs and what we regulate for. So the top one, abandoned wells, are not allowed in any of the zones. If you have an abandoned well, you have to cap it correctly so that you don't have a direct, pipe basically right into our drinking water. You've got auto repair stores, you've got car washes, you've got cemeteries, golf courses, parks, just things that have chemicals or potential to contaminate there. So there's 2 pages of those, but as you can see over here on the right side of the table, you've got in zone 1, basically everything's permitted within 100 feet of the well, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but zone 2 is a little bit less restrictive, and zone 3 is, permitted, and conditional use that we go through, and we work with Chad and his department closely as we get developments in, and we check these things and make sure that they meet all the compliance, and so this plan doesn't necessarily add a whole lot to the requirements for what happens, because there are other state laws and federal laws that have to be taken into account for chemicals, but they're just, this is what we do to try and protect our drinking water. All of the PCSs in our report are considered adequately controlled, except for the residential areas through zones 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's pretty standard across every municipality that I know of. That the residential areas are hard to be considered adequately controlled because there's just so many different things that could possibly happen, but the risk is considered fairly low. Most people are not storing large amounts of chemicals or other things, and there's a lot of education out there about not dumping stuff in places you shouldn't be doing that. So as a management tool for the residential areas, we do a few things. We send out notifications in our water bills about groundwater protection, send them to our website, ask them to pay attention to that. We talk to the 4th grade classes as part of our stormwater pollution prevention, and we also bring up potential water contamination in those. We put information on our annual water quality report, and then we also provide fact sheets for people on how to use and store fertilizer, pesticides, household hazardous wastes, things like that. And then every 2 years we conduct a internal review of all of the PCSs that are inventoried. Some of them drop off because the business no longer is in business, or they've moved locations or something, and others are added based on where they're added and located. So we have that inventory list there. And then every 6 years we resubmit to the state and they concur. So everything in our plan is, to our knowledge, acceptable and will be accepted. We anticipate that we will get a letter of concurrence from the state, and if there's any issues that they have, we'll fix those and change those. But just wanted to kind of give that update to you. If you want to see more of the plan, I'm happy to meet with you offline and talk about it, and we can show you all the details. But just wanted to keep you informed that every 6 years that happens. It kind of happens behind the scenes, but it's really an integral part of keeping our water safe and the water quality that we have and provide to those residents. So is there any questions I can answer?
I got one.
Yeah.
Mainly out of curiosity, because I'm sure it's taken care of, where we get Weaver Basin water introduced into our system as well. I imagine they go through the same thing.
Yeah, they have their own source protection plans, and then
They just pass that on to the city with the water that we get from them, or how does that work?
what do you mean pass it on?
Well, technically I could say the water in Layton City has some of that water coming as well. So they're just certifying that their water is clean when it comes here, or how
Oh
does
yeah,
that
they
work?
they have the same regulations and requirements for testing and sampling that we do. And then when we issue our water quality report every year, we actually can combine our data with their data to show what those numbers
The
are.
overall system then?
Yeah, and then they have these same drinking water source protection plans in place, and we coordinate with them so that we know where their zones are, and then if there's any development that occurs, we reach out to them in those areas, and we require the developments to meet those same drinking water protection zones requirements. So. Any other questions?
Just the general ones. I know that I remember, I think it was maybe a year or so ago, I think Sandy City had a water contamination problem. I remember, I just pulled up the thing, Department of Environmental Quality, I guess, had a year-long investigation about something about a safety features weren't properly functioning. And I was just curious, has there been any follow-up with what our infrastructure looks like to assure that we don't have something similar happen in Layton? I think I actually talked to Terry about this at one time, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're good to go." I just was curious, since it's on the topic, if there was any remedy or any follow-up after that happened to Sandy City, so we don't have something like that happen here.
Yeah, it was a fluoride overdose basically into the system that occurred there. Yeah, we immediately when that occurred, we double checked our systems. We do have some fail safes built into our systems that are pretty robust so that it can't do what it did in Sandy. And then also the health department came out and checked those. And then recently we just went through a sanitary survey with the health department and the state Division of Drinking Water and have confirmed that all of our facilities are up to standard and that they don't pose any kind of risk that way. So
Great. Thanks.
Well, and
Thanks,
Steve, don't you guys do your own water testing quite often as well?
yeah,
From what I
we
understand.
do
I mean,
all
you're-
of our own. Well, we send samples to labs for
Right.
testing and things, and so we do bacteriological samples every single month, and then we also do chemical samplings and other requirements from the state and the EPA for different contaminants that might be in the water regularly, and we do pretty well.
Any other questions?
Hey.
Thank you. Are you going to do the next one as well?
I'm going
water
to start the
rates
next
first.
one and then invite Tracy up, and we'll
Okay.
kind of tag team this one if that's okay.
Yep, that works.
So I believe I can't remember how long ago it was, we talked about the water rates, and we wanted to kind of give you a recap of the projects as well as the situation financially. So I'm going to cover the projects here, and then we'll have Tracy cover the financial and whatever else I miss, I guess. So starting off with the projects, I wanted to remind everybody when we talked about the master plan, I don't know how many times we've met on that and talked, but one of the key components of that master plan was that in order to keep the rates as reasonable and low as possible, as well as provide quality water service, that the master plan hinges on a hybrid system of culinary and secondary water being implemented throughout the city. And part of that is optimizing our sources of water from Weber Basin, our wells, and on also the surface water we get for the secondary water that is available to the residents. So if you recall, probably don't, but in our master plan, there's this chart, and in the chart, basically here's the list of capital projects and what we think we would be expending every year. And I just want to point out that the red boxes are culinary water capital projects, and the kind of brownish project boxes are secondary water projects. And so you can see up until 2018, 2019, 2020, they're very heavy on the capital projects for culinary water. And then in 2021, you start seeing more secondary, and then it kind of flips in 22, 23, where we got some pretty heavy expenditures on the secondary side. So with that, I want to go into what projects we have done so far off of the list, and then also kind of projects we might see coming just based on what we're seeing around the city as we move forward. So graphically, wanted to highlight some projects. The projects in green, most of them are kind of on the east side there. Those are projects that have been completed to this point. The Highway 193 project up there on the north side of the city was done because UDOT was reconstructing Highway 193. The one there towards Antelope and Emerald Drive was completed with development, and then the project down in the lower part of the screen here, that is actually 4 projects that have been completed in conjunction with the Highway 89 construction that's going on. And then this kind of orange color out west here is a project that has been completed partially by development. So the green are projects that are done, orange are projects that are partially completed, and then the pinkish color are projects that we can foresee in the next probably 1 to 3 years, either starting or needing to be completed as part of that project. So we have a fire flow project down here that we want to complete. We have a pump station at Fairfield and Gordon that we would like to reconstruct and improve. And then potentially we're seeing some development pressures up here in the Eastgate area that we might need to extend some water lines in. So what does that mean on the chart here? The Valley View tank, Valley View source redundancy, and Sandridge Valley View connection are all those projects I showed on the screen here in this area. Major trunk lines that bring water from our Oak Ridge tank to our Valley View tank, the new one that was just finished, and then the Oak Ridge, or excuse me, the Oak Hills tank was removed. The 193 project is here as number C7, and then the 2200 West is identified there at C4. That project currently hasn't been doing a whole lot, but there has been some interest in the property in that area, and so that one could potentially, ramp up fairly quickly if needs come about with that. So, and then you've got the business park distribution line here. Depending on development pressures, we could see that one possibly move forward. And then we would like to this fire flow project down here is one. It's not a huge project, but it is one that we want to get taken care of, and it's in the CIP. So
Is that business park one the one on the west side?
that business park one is this one up here on the north end by the East Gate. Yeah.
Okay.
So I will talk to you a little bit about the one on the west side as well, but the west side project is not as big, so it doesn't end up in this map. The Valley View tank project was obviously completed. The Valley View Snow Creek pump station was completed recently. We could see this Oak Ridge to Fairfield project being one that's needed, and we've kind of moved that one a little bit because some of these others have shifted forward. So a couple of ongoing ones that you can't really show on the map. The SCADA upgrades that we have, the SCADA is what we use to control and monitor our water system, our pumps, our tanks, our wells remotely. It tracks data for us and helps us manage the water system. Basically computer network systems that over time need to be upgraded because they become obsolete and new technologies arise to help us manage those systems better. Meter replacement is just an ongoing project. We spend quite a bit of money to get them all updated, and then as the meters fall out of warranty or stop functioning because the batteries die, we need to get those replaced. So those are both fairly large projects that we're chunking away at as we go. And then the auxiliary power project is one that we're looking at. We've actually applied for some FEMA money if we can receive a grant. We hope to be able to retrofit or equip some of our wells and pump stations with some auxiliary power generators. So
Steve, that
Yeah,
meter
Tom.
replacement, $8 million, is that based on multiple years?
yeah,
Or
that's
what is
just
that?
there's a 10-year life on our batteries, on our meters, and then there's a prorated 10-year warranty on that. And so after the meter drops out of warranty, then we have to start replacing those, and then eventually meters wear out, and so we have to get those replaced. So yeah, that's over the next 10 years. We anticipate that we'll have to start replacing those meters as we go. So it's a substantial cost that, unfortunately, in order to bill the customers, we have to maintain our meters and keep them going. But we are looking at other technologies. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say looking at the technologies are moving forward to where we don't have moving parts in some of the meters, but unfortunately the meters are not really any cheaper than the ones we have now. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so that's spread out over.
Yeah, that's spread out. I don't want to. Sorry, let me clarify that one and the SCADA upgrades. We've been kind of putting $100,000 a year into those SCADA upgrades so that we aren't, overloading the system and making sure that we're not just trying to chunk that $8 million. That's not an immediate cost, but it is one I wanted to point out. We are doing a little bit every single year as we see the meters fail and need to get them replaced. So if I can jump to the secondary water. So if you remember, the first chart was, pretty heavy secondary, culinary, and that's what you can see from this chart. The secondary list, we've had a little bit of development out here in the 2200 West area that has pushed one of these projects, and then some lines up 1,700 that have been installed recently. And then I want to point out that Layton Parkway from 22 to 27 and also 2700 West all the way up to Hillfield Road are pretty significant projects for secondary water expansion that are going to take place. We're currently in the design of Layton Parkway to the West Davis Corridor interchange and also up to Gordon Avenue, or excuse me, Gentile Street. And then Davis County has awarded us $6 million to help build 2700 West over the next 2 years. So those are big projects that are coming in. We're seeing development interest along Church Street that will facilitate or necessitate us increasing the line in Church Street as well. Holmes Creek Irrigation is working with UDOT right now on this 89 project, and they have an interest in expanding their or replacing their outfall line out of the reservoir as part of that project. And so we anticipate that one potentially could come to fruition fairly quickly. And then the large project on this project or this map here is this Gordon Avenue trunk line that will run and help create the big loop in the secondary water system that we have designed. So and then it would come down by our Ellison Park and connect up the system. So looking at this chart, again, we've got, one project up here at the top. We got this one that's partially completed. And then you can see S4, S9, and S10 are 2700 West and Layton Parkway. So those three projects alone are slated to be about $1 million. S6 and S7. S7 is the trunk line. This big trunk line right here on Gordon Avenue is S7, and then this is S6 that drops down to Cold Creek Way. And then the S19 is the Holmes Creek trunk line, and so you can see it's about $800,000. So looking at those projects coming up, you can see 2021, 22, that's why the plan shows that there's a big chunk of projects that are going to need to be built in the secondary system as well. So what does that all add up to? I just wanted to kind of summarize all of these items in pink from both the secondary and the culinary line. If you put all those projects together for the culinary, it's about $2.8 million. If you put all the secondary together, it's 9.6. So total, we're looking at $12.4 million that could come into play in the next 1 to 3 years. Doesn't mean that they'll all be finished in 1 to 3 years, but certainly could be started, or if development pressures accelerate or something, those projects could come to fruition very quickly. So we do anticipate some of these, like the 2700 West and Layton Parkway. I mean, those are scheduled to be built in the spring. We're starting Layton Parkway is the intent, and then 27 will be done in that same construction cycle. So with that, I'm going to trade places here with Tracy, and maybe I'll go over to the other mic and then let him talk about the finances.
Thanks, Steve. Mayor, members of the council. So all that about projects is a good time, and it's good that one of you requested that we report on the projects and how they sit on the master plan, because it's very important when we consider do we need this additional increase that we're talking about, and how did we fare in this second year of rate increases and so forth. I think one thing I might add to what Steve said that he mentioned to me and Alex as we met together and discussed all of this was that these projects seem to be moving along according to the master plan. So, the projects are being completed, things are being done, progress is moving ahead. And so according to the way the master plan was programmed, those projects are in line. It might switch one here or there, one for another, but all in all, moving ahead. So keep that in mind as we talk about some numbers. One thing that I wanted to look at first a little bit before we talk too much about the actual finances, and because it plays into it, is water consumption. You'll remember that as we established the new rates, conservation was a big deal. Tiers, we set tiers up, which we never had before. Pretty much you could, you're charged $1.14 per thousand, however many thousand you want to use. And there was no real control on that. Well, the state came in, said, yeah, we don't like that idea. We put the tiers in. So you're all very familiar with that. Well, this chart is is August of 2019 compared to August of 2020. And it's residential water. We call it water one, which is people who do not have access to secondary. So that's the primary people that we're concerned about when we talk about culinary water. And you can see that, you know, up here, if we said somebody that used over 250,000 gallons, you know, we had 3, we still have 3. We had somebody in 2019 that used over 400,000. They luckily went away. I don't know where they went. Hopefully they're still here, but their water usage went down. You know, as we get down here, we can see that we had about 285,000 accounts that decreased their consumption. 285 accounts, sorry, not 285,000, 285 accounts that decreased their consumption. And it's pretty good levels, you know, people that were between 100 and 150,000, you know, we dropped 114 accounts out of that level. So where did they go? Well, a lot of them ended up, you know, they could have just shifted from one down to the next, but we did get a big increase in the 20 to 30,000, 20 to 40,000 gallon range. One point that I'll explain a little later, we had this group that 0 to 10 is the base, so you didn't use any excess water, and that category actually decreased, which we don't like to see. So they probably popped up into this other area as well, and we think we have a pretty good explanation for that. But thought I'd show you those numbers. Obviously, I'll shoot these slides out to you after the presentation. If you have any questions, you can look at them. But I thought that was good information to see that those tiers are working the way the state intended, and also the way as a city we intended. You know, we want people to be careful with the water. It's a valuable resource. Steve just went through a whole presentation on, you know, drinking water safety and how important that is. So we want to do that. This next chart just breaks up what I just showed you into the billable tiers. And so anything over 80,000, we had 831 accounts. Now we have 483. You know, that's a 42% drop in people that were above 80,000 gallons. That's fantastic. This tier didn't change much, and it may be that some of the ones that were over 80 just dropped in here and then others dropped out. The tier of 26 to 45 gained quite a bit, and so did the one below that. And then, like we saw in the other slide, the base, you know, lost some people. They went up into those other tiers. So, you know, why do we think some of this happened, where these tiers gained more, this one lost some? Well, 2020 is labeled as the 16th driest year in history. You know, so the water season, not necessarily the year's not over, right? And 2019 was the 10th wettest year. And so you can see that between 2019, this again is residential with no secondary, we had 1,788,000 gallons that we billed. And in 2020, we had almost 2.2 billion, a change of 392 million gallons of water. 22%. You know, you might say, oh, 392 million gallons of water, is that a lot? I mean, it sounds like a lot, but is it compared to the total? Well, 22%. That's big increase in consumption. And we're attributing most of that, you know, we've put the tiers in, and that should be pushing it down, and we could see from those consumption slides that it is pushing consumption down. Lots and lots of people dropped out, 40-something% dropped out of that top tier into some other tier. But this, you know, you can't really control Mother Nature. And so when you go from the wettest year to one of the driest, from one of the wettest to one of the driest years, and you consume this kind of water, then, you know, that causes a problem as far as consumption goes. Trying to think if I wanted to show you any, or talk about anything else on that slide with you. But, no, I think that's good. So we take a look at all of that, and we say, where are we financially? The model originally put out by Zions in the rate study showed that this revenue line here would go up. We had a 35% increase, we had a 20% increase, and there's a 10% increase proposed to get us to this point right here. We need to be able to cover capital, we need to cover operations, maintenance, employees, keeping a good, solid, a very good exceptional system. I mean, in my mind, if I'm living in any city, the thing I want that I'm most concerned about is I need to be able to drink water, right? I mean, that's pretty important. So the model also pointed out here the base rates. You know, we started out at 1285 back in 2018. We bumped the base rate. This is on most residences have under a 3/4 inch meter. And so they fall into this category. It went to 1735. Right now it's at 2080. And with the 10% increase, it would go to 2290. We've seen this slide before. And this is on the excess consumption down here in this end without secondary water. You know, it went from 114 to 154. It's right now at 185 per 1,000 gallons. And it would go up to 203 per 1,000 gallons of excess consumption. So those are just in there to remind you what the projection, what the model said we should do. And as Steve and I talked about it, he reminded me, he said, you know, this is great, but remember, when you and I first reviewed this study from Zions Bank, they had proposed much higher rates than this. This 396 that's down here in the over 80,000, one, it was over 60,000, anything over 60, and it was $5. And so kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about rates. The original study had proposed much higher than what was adopted. So where did we end up at between November 2019 and October 2020, just a month ago? Well, the study, based on that chart I showed you a couple back, Zions Bank rate study, projected that we should generate $10.7 million in this water year, more or less. And over that period of time, we've billed 11,521,811. So that's a difference 806,000, 7.52% ahead of where the model said we should be. So we looked at that, and before I had all this stuff about, you know, driest year, wettest year, all that kind of thing, Alex and Steve and I were together talking about this, right? Well, what would have caused this? Because what should have happened to this 7.52% figure, in the 10.7 million, the 20% increase is already figured in. And so you shouldn't be jumping up that much. So we're thinking when we change the tiers from 60,000 at the top to 80,000, we were trying to squish this number a little bit and get it closer. Not to even, that wasn't ever our intent, but not growing. Right? Last year, the number there was 5.8%. Now it's 7.5%. Well, that led me to do the research on, well, was it a really wet year? How many gallons? Was there a lot more consumption? And so forth. I had originally looked at just by tiers, and that was looking pretty good. Everything was pushing down. People were coming under the 80,000 level. But like you could see from a couple of slides back here, you know, we used 392 million more gallons, 22% increase in the gallons because of the change in precipitation in the water season. So that made me take a look at, you know, you have this slide here. It shows the projected, it's the same as the one before. Actually, what we build, $806,000 difference, 392 million gallons more than the prior year, and the fact that we went from the 10th wettest to the 16th driest year. So if I look at a transition from wettest to driest year, 392 million gallons, if I bill that out in thousands of gallons, there's 392,805 units that I'm going to bill. And if I use the lowest tier, which we know they didn't all fall into the lowest tier, $1.85, I'm going to generate $726,000. Well, we were only ahead of the program by 806,000. And if I take out all of this consumption based on jumping from a wet year to a dry year, I eliminate a lot of that. Now, this isn't, you know, some big calculus study that's taken into account every property size and all that kind of thing, right? But it's pretty simple math to come up with these numbers. So what should a model normally do? A model should look at average year. We shouldn't base our model on the wettest year or the driest year. We should say, what's average? What's an average year? So if we did that, we would consider that we would probably have consumed an additional 196,000 gallons going from the wettest year to an average year. That would have given us 196,000 billable units of 1,000 gallons each at $1.85. That'd be $363,000 in additional revenue. So, well, in excess consumption revenue. So I'm kind of going somewhere with this, right? Hang in there with me. Yeah. So the point would be that we went from the projection here is the same, that it's 10,715,000. We collected 11,521. If we had remained in a wet year, so if we hadn't gone from wet to dry, and we had about the same amount of consumption, we would have generated 10 million, where'd my mouse go? About 10.8 million. And this 7.2% ahead of where the projection is would have only been 0.74. Now that, again, isn't reality, right? We don't want to look at just wet to dry. So if we look at average, we would have generated 11.15 million, 442,000, and we'd be sitting at about 4% ahead of the projections of the model. So hopefully that makes a little sense. What I'm trying to do is not base a potential rate increase on going from a very wet year to a very dry year and, oh, hey, 7.5, we're in a fantastic position, right? Well, we shouldn't base going forward in our projection model on that one transition year. So I'm trying to compensate for that and show you what an average year would do. So if I look at an average year and I say that in 2021, we're going to say, okay, last year we had 11,521,000, but if we fall back down to an average year of consumption, we're only going to generate 11,158 if we do no increase. Well, if we don't do an increase for 2021 and we only generate 11,158, now we're going to be 6.2% behind the model. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Steve went through all the projects. The projects are online, right? Development's still happening. The pandemic didn't slow anything down in our city. I could probably bring some sales tax numbers out for you. I don't remember if I've talked about those yet or not. I mean, the last ones we got were way ahead of where they should be for September. So, nothing's really slowing down here. And, we don't want to get ourselves, in my opinion, 6.2% behind the model. If we were to do a 5%, we'd still be 1.5% behind the model. If we did a 7%, we'd be about even with the model. And if we do it at 10%, which is what the model recommends, if we consider average precipitation and consumption, then we'll sit at about 3% ahead of the model, $379,000. So if you look at all of those projects that Steve listed, you could easily flip a small to medium-sized project into the mix, and you'd eat that up pretty quick. Now you'd still be in a good position because you're going to be at even, but I don't know that, I don't necessarily like to recommend things where we're at even because, one, there's a lot of things that we don't really consider. We looked at that aren't considered in these numbers. If you look at conservation, we saw a 44% decrease in the number of people over 80,000 gallons. Who's to say that doesn't continue next year and the next year and the next year as people get tired of paying that rate that's over 80,000 gallons? They're going to keep cutting and cutting and cutting. We still received a lot of calls this fall, not nearly as many as the fall before, which was not good, right? But, we still received a lot of calls from people. And obviously our recommendations to them were, based on your consumption, you are watering way too much. You still need to cut back, and you still can cut back a lot, and your lawn's not going to die. So there's a lot of conservation possible in here, and that could affect this number.
How many, just a quick question, Tracy.
Yeah, sorry, I should quit talking and ask.
No, what would you guess the decrease in calls was? Half as many, 2/3 as many? I mean, just a guess.
In what, sorry?
The number of calls you got from one year to this year.
Oh, it was probably a quarter.
So a lot less.
Yeah, a lot less, but still quite a few. You know, the problem we had that first year was, despite trying to get the word out that this was going to happen, the bills rolled in pretty late compared to, so people didn't have really a lot of time to adjust before they got hit with a big bill. Even though we warned them, newsletter, flyers, all kinds of things, you need to adjust. Until you actually see that bill in front of you and kind of go, "Oh, man, that's a hefty bill," you don't make much of an adjustment. Anyway, that I'll pop back to this slide in just a second. Yeah, we got to wrap her up here.
Yeah.
I did want to show you these two slides. They're in here. You can take a look at them. In the study, they did base rates, and you could see that we were, before we did any kind of increases, at the bottom. With the increases, we would end up somewhere, a third, bottom third. Well, I went back and compared some of those now for 10,000 gallons. We have a 10,000 gallon base. So if you look across all these cities, even after 3 years of increases, and Alex will be the first one to tell you, we don't do things just because the neighbors do, right? But I know that you hear it a lot because we do. Oh, well, if I lived over here, you guys are robbing me, I live here, I live there, they'd be a lot less. That's not true. Every city our size in this state and every city around us, Kaysville, Syracuse, Farmington, North Salt Lake, Clearfield, well, except in the Clearfield, but every one of them is charging more than we are for 10,000 gallons of water. I think that's good for you to know. Anyway, that's really all I have to talk about, other than, I guess, as a final note, I know that our recommendation will be to continue, stay the course, implement the 10%. It'll put us in this range of being in line with what the master plan says we're going to do as far as projects, conservation. We didn't even take time to mention maintenance. We have a lot of maintenance on a system that is this large and this complex, and we need to start pushing that forward as well. Anyway, I'll be quiet now. Sorry. Any other questions?
I got one quick one. That compares us on the base 10,000 gallons, but do you have any idea where we are in the 40 to 50 or the 60 to 70 or whatever, the upper tiers, how we compare with those other cities?
Most of them that I looked at, now you got to kind of be careful because you're not comparing apples to apples. Some cities have secondary through their entire city, and basically you have to use it. And so there's a whole separate charge for that. So it's kind of hard to compare once you get up out of that base rate. But when I looked at I looked at all of those other cities, their tiers are just like ours. I mean, they ratchet up pretty quick, and most of them are $4 to $5 on the top end. Some of them only gave you room up to 20,000 because then you're expected to be on secondary. So when you got to 20,000, you're paying $5 per thousand. I didn't see any that were saying we're out of line or that we are the exception or some anomaly. Every one of those cities on that list has a structure very similar to ours.
Tracy, just on the issue of growth, I mean, obviously, the more homes we have, the more they consume, but I feel like the majority of what we're building now has smaller lots, which I would think the outside watering would be a lot less because there's just not as much property to water. Is that factored into this at all?
In the model, it was factored in, and that's why we adjusted the base the way we do, because we want to make sure that the base is covered. You don't want to just be counting on excess revenue. You've got to have a base for your base maintenance, base projects, employees to maintain the system. And so in the original model, and and that translates into these numbers as well, that kind of thing is in there, that everyone pays a base. Because we get a bunch of calls all the time that are, well, I only use 500 gallons of water. Why do I have to pay $20.90? Well, you have the water available, right? And in order to have the water available, everybody has to pay the base. So anyway.
And the other question I have, you showed the projects and stuff like that. Some of those will be in areas in which there's new growth. Will there be impact fees that help offset some of those costs, or this is all funded strictly from water?
I can let Steve
Yeah,
answer
so
that.
some of those projects are part of the impact fee facilities plan as well. And so there are, I'm going to try and not speak ill of the impact fee law, but there are some components of that law where we can only charge impact fees for about a 10-year window, and then everything else beyond that has to be paid for up front and then collected back as a kind of back charge to those developments. And so there is a component where if we pioneer the line, then we can get reimbursed, but we can only use impact fees for kind of that 10-year growth window in that plan that we have.
Any other questions?
I assume we're going to have a lot more time to discuss this as we move forward. My recollection was that we took the water increase out of the budget, and that we were going to then reintroduce it if we felt that it was beneficial, have a public comment, and have a roll call vote. Correct? Okay. So we'll have lots more time to discuss it. And since we're 4 minutes out, I can take my questions and table them till later. But I thank you for this presentation. It's very helpful for us to be able to kind of see exactly what we wanted, both on the project side and on the revenue side, to see where things are, where they stand, and where we think that they might need to be, and what options we might have to try to fund the projects that we have, and then hopefully we can discuss amongst ourselves as a council the best policy for the city. So thanks both of you for putting that together. That's very helpful.
You bet.
Well said. Thanks for wrapping up for me. Okay, with that, Council, let's go ahead and take a quick break. We've got 3 minutes, then we'll come back to our regular scheduled meeting.
Clean up that.
Which is December 3rd. We're starting at 7:02 p.m. And as customary, we have we do our prayer and pledge. We actually change up each month. And since it's a new month, tonight will be led by Councilmember Dave Thomas.
Mayor, for the opening prayer, I'd like to have Trace Chatwin. He's our, what do I want to call it?
Ramp.
Chairman of the Ramp Committee, to give the opening prayer, and then afterwards I'll give the Pledge of Allegiance.
Perfect. You're in charge, Dave.
Huh?
You're in charge. What do you want to do?
Okay, meeting's adjourned. Let's do it like we always do. We'll do the pledge.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Father in heaven, we humbly bow our heads before Thee in this hallowed chamber. We are grateful unto Thee for this city we live in. We're grateful for the fine leadership in which we have. Please bless these leaders that they may be able to have inspiration to lead and guide our community. And bless our community members too, that we may be able to be appreciative, that we may be able to take into our hearts this community. And we're grateful for this time of year also. Bless us with health and strength, that this pandemic may be able to subside, and that those that work in this community may be able to be healthy and strong. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Yeah. Excellent, Claire. Thank you, Mr. Chatwin. Okay. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that I understand that we're here in the ho-ho Christmas spirit. Given the fact that this year has been so unusual, it was like, let's continue that. You have a new first here. This is the first time I think the council has come dressed in kicking off the holiday season. So thank you, council, for being good sports here.
the second time.
on the,
Yeah, we had a holiday in August that we celebrated. I mean,
okay. Council, I have 2 sets of minutes that need to be adopted. So would someone like to make a motion on that?
Mayor, I'll make the motion to accept the minutes of the Layton City Council work meeting of September 3rd and the Layton City Council meeting on November 5th is written.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, there's no opposed there, so we'll move on. So next would be our municipal announcements. Which, does anybody have any or aware of anything going on in the city?
Mayor, just the lights, the Christmas lights, or whatever you're going to call.
The
And
lights
that-
before Christmas?
It's the lights before Christmas, yes, and the lights after Christmas too. But starts at dusk, goes till 11. You can drive around, walk around, whatever you want to do. As usual, they're the greatest lights in the state of Utah.
At the best price, too.
Yeah, you can't beat the price, that's for sure.
Okay, that's a thank you to our Parks and Recs folks.
Yeah,
for,
I'd second that. Thanks to the Parks Department for all their hard work.
yeah, they really have done an excellent job here in making our city look festive for this time of year.
Well, on the addition of the 100 for the 100th birthday or anniversary is a nice addition to the park this year too, since we didn't really get to celebrate it earlier. So.
Especially the persons that made it.
Yeah, you're talking the elf on the Santa over there. So yes, thanks, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Don Wilhelm. Yes. And in addition to the lights, obviously we do the elf on the shelf game. And I noticed that we have the sounds on certain animals out there. So anybody who wants to come to the park, get out of your car and walk around. It's great to have the kids push those buttons and kind of get a quick little education, quite honestly. So it's a good addition. So thank you again, everyone, for pulling that off for us. Okay, here comes a fun part of our meeting, which is a verbal petition and presentation. And this year, I'd like to call Michelle Howard up, and she's got a Volunteer of the Year award. So, Michelle, would you mind sharing that with us?
Okay, if I take this off.
Absolutely. And you have to talk, that mic you have to talk into it.
Great. Well, Mayor and Council, thank you so much for letting me be here with you today. If I need to speak up, just let me know. So, as you know, our department functions quite heavily or relies quite heavily on volunteers for us to function, whether it's the commissions and advisory boards we work with, whether it's special service projects or special projects, or the hundreds and thousands of volunteer coaches that come through our department every year. We work quite heavily with volunteers, and every year we like to come to you towards the end of the year and recognize one of those volunteers as our Volunteer of the Year. And this year, I would like to present to you Mr. Michael Trent as our Volunteer of the Year. Mike, if you wouldn't mind coming up and standing here by me. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on our relationship with Mike. Mike is actually with the American Youth Soccer Organization region that's here in Layton, so AYSO. And that's really significant for our city and our department because AYSO is the recognized provider of recreation soccer. So our Parks and Rec department, we do not provide recreation soccer because Mike and his group do such a good job at providing that recreation-based soccer. They provide that for us. And because of that, we work very closely with them. And for the past 3 to 4 years, myself and Mike have worked very closely together. Mike, for the past, since 2017, served as the regional commissioner with the local AYSO. And what that job entails is they function basically as the liaison between Layton City and the AYSO region. And he's responsible to manage the day-to-day business of the region. including the coordination of over 1,400 participants and 200 volunteers each year.
Wow.
In January 2020, Mr. Trent was appointed to area commissioner. So if he didn't have enough responsibilities just watching over Layton, he decided or was gifted moving up to an area commissioner for AYSO, which is in charge of coordination of local AYSO regions in Davis County, Weber County, Box Elder County, and even into Wyoming. And mind you, this man has a full-time job. That's not his full-time job. So Mr. Trent was integral in coordinating AYSO Recreation Soccer League play and field usage in Layton City. He worked closely with the Parks and Rec Department to ensure field usage and a high standard of league management. And I'm sure he loved those Saturday morning calls from me at 6:30 going, hey, it's been raining for the past 15 hours. You can't play today. Right? Sorry. Okay, so during his tenure, Mr. Trent was instrumental in the advancement. Oh, I messed up. Hold on. He worked closely with the Parks and Rec Department to ensure field usage and a high standard of league management. During his tenure, he was instrumental in the advancement of the AYSO Extras program, which serves as a stepping stone for players who want to explore a more competitive brand of soccer without the full expense and commitment of a club team. So not only do they do the recreation-based soccer, they do kind of that middle soccer area for kids that may be interested in going on to a more competitive environment. So like I already mentioned, he does maintain a full-time job, and he does live here in Layton City with his wife, Robin, who we have here with us today. And thank you, Robin, for donating him to us and being pulled into this as well. I know that you've sat in my office a couple times also. So him and his wife, Robin, live here in Layton City with their 2 children. And I personally would like to extend a thank you on behalf of myself, on behalf of our department, and especially those 1,400-ish kids times 3 to 4 years that you've impacted over your time here with us. So with that, thank you, Mike, and Mayor Petro, if you'd like to come up.
I do.
Or if you're going to stand there, I'm sorry.
Actually, what I'd like to do is read a proclamation. So I'll read it and then come over and give it to you, and then we'll have you come around. So obviously you heard a lot here, so that definitely requires a proclamation. It says, whereas the Volunteer of the Year Award is presented annually by the Layton City Parks and Recreation Department, and whereas the Volunteer of the Year Award is presented to a deserving individual or organization who has demonstrated an exceptional level of volunteer service to Layton City, and whereas this year's recipient, Mr. Michael Trent, has served as a Layton City Parks and Recreation Department liaison to the local American Youth Soccer Association Region 239 for 4 years, and whereas Mr. Trent has demonstrated an exceptional level of volunteerism to the American Youth Soccer Association in the capacity of regional commissioner serving the Layton area, and whereas Mr. Trent has demonstrated an exceptional level of volunteerism to the American Youth Soccer Association in the capacity of area director, serving Davis, Weber, and Box Elder County. And whereas Mr. Trent has demonstrated an exceptional level of volunteerism to Layton City. Now, therefore, Layton City's proclamation is in recognition of Michael Trent as Layton City Parks and Recreation Department 2020 recipient of the Volunteer of the Year Award for outstanding service to our community. So, Michael, I'd like to present this to you. I believe Michelle's got something for you, but we would also like you to go ahead and, if you don't mind, you can bump elbows as a thank you to all the rest of the council here.
And I should have done this while I was standing here, but we do have this plaque to present to Mike as well in recognition of his service.
Is that how he spells his name?
I sure hope so. The first draft they sent me said 2019, and I thought, I think maybe he'd rather think it was 2019.
So,
You know,
I only went crazy.
can I say something?
Sure.
Go ahead, Mike.
go ahead. You can't leave. We got some more comments
The,
here.
the amount of time that you put in, I mean, you work for a living and then you work because there's a bunch of little kids that kick balls around. But the amount of time is just astronomical. I mean, I've seen it, I've been involved with it, and I understand. And I know you understand. I don't know if the other people that may be listening do, but the amount of coordination it takes to run the amount of kids that you're running is just, you know, I mean, I can only applaud you because you're doing it. What do you get, a t-shirt maybe one time if they leave it at the park and it fits you? Yeah. So anyway, all of us, I mean, you know, you represent the city. You obviously have represented it well. Michelle wouldn't have chosen you to be this if you weren't. And I do applaud you. And I applaud your wife for putting up with you because you're gone a lot.
Yeah. Just echoing Councilman Thomas's thoughts. I remember growing up playing lots of sports, and I just showed up to the game, and that's all I did. And as I get older, I realize how much time and effort and energy it takes to put on. And I love soccer. I showed you my Liverpool tie I have on right here. So it just happened to be that you're presenting at a time when it's a great sport, and it's we just appreciate you sharing your time and your talents to help kids be able to be a part of it and get the teamwork and all that goes with playing the sport. So thank you so much for all you do for the city. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that too. I have a granddaughter that plays the extra. That's been a really nice addition to give the little boost without committing to the fees and the schedule of that. But I also want to commend you and AYSO for handling the pandemic this year. And the fact that you willingly accepted, you know, masks on the sidelines, and some of the parents were pretty good about it, some weren't. But, you know, I think you had an additional with the, you know, schedule being messed up and just everything. And thank you for that as well.
Okay. You deserve a round of applause. Thank you again. We really appreciate all your energy. Okay, we'll now move on to our citizens' comments portion of our meeting. So if anyone in the audience would like to make a comment, you're welcome to step up to either side of the podium, state your name and address for the record. Okay, seeing that there's no comments from the citizens there, and certainly if anybody had wanted to comment earlier online, Mr. Crane would have brought it to my attention by now, and we haven't had any, so I'm just going to go ahead and proceed with our meeting, which brings us down to our consent items. And our first item will be presented by Mr. Terry Colburn, and it's an agreement between Layton City and Evergreen Holding.
Thank you, Mayor. Bring before the council tonight Resolution 2071, an agreement between Layton City and Evergreen Holding LLC, entitled Culinary Waterline Improvements, Casing for 8-inch Culinary Water Payback Agreement for the Mecum Towns Development. Evergreen Holding LLC has installed certain improvements, including culinary water improvements that exceed the typical residential utility requirements in conjunction with the Mecum Town subdivision. The installation of these exceeded improvements will benefit other properties than those owned by the developer. The improvements will be publicly owned and maintained by the city once they have been granted final acceptance for the subdivision. The city desires to reimburse the developer for the cost of the exceeded improvements not directly associated with their property. The total reimbursement amount for all exceeded improvements is $33,583.09. Staff recommends council adopt resolution 2071.
Council, do you have any questions regarding this item? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Colburn.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, next up, we'll have an amended plot presentation by Mr. Chad Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This first application is for an amended subdivision plat for Eastgate Business Park. This is the location of the property at the very northern terminus of Fairfield Road. Here's a shot of the entire property shown in that red cross hatching. We're going to just be talking about a little portion of that up there, the very northeast section. The existing plat includes what we show as Lot 102. The boundary is shown where my cursor is following. The owner of that Lot 102, the occupant of that Lot 102, is requesting this amendment so they can facilitate some expansion opportunities for their business. That's Janicki Enterprises up there. So this new amended plat changes the lot numbers a little bit. That's just a function of whenever you amend a plat, you have to change those lot numbers. Changes the size, as you can see there on the plat. It's increasing that size of the former Lot 102 to 9.7 acres or so. That has the effect of reducing the other portion a little bit. We've reviewed that subdivision amendment, and we are recommending that the council approve.
Okay. Council, any questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll look for a motion then on our consent items as A and B.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion on our consent items that we adopt, on item A, adopt the agreement between Layton City and the Evergreen Holdings LLC on the Culinary water line improvements for the Meekum Town subdivision, and that we grant plat approval for the amended plat at Eastgate Business Park subdivision, First Amendment at 3835 North Fairfield Road.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to our public hearing portion of the meeting. So, Chad, I see that you're still there. Thank you very much. Because he'll be presenting item A, which is an amendment in the Layton City Municipal Code.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is, again, something we've talked about for the last couple of meetings. It's a home occupation text amendment to our zoning standards. The code currently allows for home occupations as an allowed use in residential zones, single-family zones. These changes, just for the benefit of those that are listening in the public that haven't been a part of those previous discussion, are really about creating additional flexibility for these types of home occupations while adding some standards that provide additional clarity as we administer these standards, and also provide for protection of the character of the residential neighborhood. We want to make sure that whatever changes we make, we're protecting that single-family residential character of those neighborhoods. Rather than going through the entire ordinance again, as we've done in the last couple of work meetings, I'll just hit a couple of highlights. We've added some new processes related to low-impact and high-impact home occupations. We defined what each of those are. For the most part, high-impact home occupations are occupations where people are coming to the home. So those have a higher impact on the neighborhood, and we wanted to make sure we had standards in place to protect those neighborhoods. The other change that we show on the screen there is that we are making sure it's clear that this still requires a Layton business license, has to be obtained before operating, and then renewed every year annually. A couple other things, we've continued to have some limitations that were already in the code as far as noise, dust, odors, fumes, glares, other nuisances. We've set some operation hours. We have been clear that no structural alterations are allowed to change the appearance of the home to look like a business that still needs to look like a home in every way. it should be invisible from the street. It should not be apparent that there's a business operating at this location. We've clarified based on our planning commission's comments that no outdoor storage is allowed for these home occupations. That all of the storage, with the exception of some permitted vehicle parking, has to be within enclosed vehicles, trailers, or structures. We've made a list of businesses that are restricted based on their nature to expand beyond the bounds of what a normal home occupation ought to be. I'm not going to go through each of those in specific, but there's a list there on the screen. One other thing that's come up as we've discussed this with the Planning Commission and council members is indoor storage, what that looks like. Right now, the code does not allow for any storage within a garage, an attached garage, or an accessory structure. That's just prohibited. We've tried to make some flexibility there. We've had a lot of businesses that have wanted to have a little bit of storage. So the proposal is that we add 300 square feet of storage in an accessory structure, 150 square feet in a garage. The one caveat to that, this is a very important caveat, is that they're not allowed to replace any required parking with this storage. So they still have to provide that required parking space within their garage. In the case of, single family residential, that's 2 covered parking spaces. So you can't remove one car and say, I'm going to use all the storage where that one car was. You still have to provide that required 2 covered parking spaces. You'll notice on these drawings that we've done as examples that there's still some room, even on a 20 by 20 2-car garage, to potentially provide some indoor storage of materials without affecting the ability to park vehicles inside there. So that's a maximum standard. They certainly could do less than that. The other example shows a 3-car garage. We talked about this last time. These are some vehicle allowances. Appreciate in our work meeting, it was pointed out that we had a transcription error. I looked back at those. I checked the Planning Commission documents, and that was just taking it from Planning Commission to the Muni Code program. That "or" was left out. That was the way it was presented at Planning Commission. So the maximum is 2 vehicles less than 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, or 1 14,000 pound, and then there's some trailer allowances in addition to that. Again, we want to make sure that the bottom line is that these should be, like I said before, invisible to neighbors, or it should have no more impact than what you'd expect from a single family home, with the exception of some of these high impact businesses. And in that case, there's process that's proposed to make sure there's an opportunity for conditions of approval to be added to mitigate any potential concerns to neighboring property owners. Here's a couple other things just to note. We're still going to make sure that we don't have things that are hazardous to the public. Things like explosives, things like that being stored on site, dangerous chemicals, those are still prohibited. One thing that we talked about a little bit, no excessive demand for public utilities or services. If a use wants to be proposed that generates the demand for example, more electricity than a single family home would normally require, and upgrades in that character, or even it could be water. Maybe they request a huge water meter that was out of characteristic with that neighborhood. Those are things that are prohibited. This has to still be a home. With that, we are recommending approval of this ordinance 20-39 with those few modifications. And also, I would add that we would also recommend that there were some typographical changes that need to be made, punctuation and those kind of things, and we would incorporate those changes in this final ordinance. So with that, are there any questions from the council?
Just a comment, and you kind of summarized it at the end about no impact on public utilities. In the paper that I gave you with the suggestions, I think internet ought to be included. I don't know if you've mentioned it or if I've read it somewhere about somebody trying to do a home business where they were the offsite storage facility for other businesses, creating their backup systems and utilizing way more internet service. And if it's, Utopia is a different thing because it's individual, but if it's other kinds of internet, that can drag the neighborhood down as well if they're utilizing too much. And so, we've got water and sewer and possibly maybe adding the word internet.
In that particular case, I think I was the one that brought up the example of another community that I worked in before. It was a server farm that was being operated, and the impact was power. That was what first drew our attention to that they They were requesting a huge power service that is much bigger than any single family residential use would normally request. Internet, you know, I turn my stuff on, but I don't know anything about the internet, to be honest with you. I know that the stuff comes across the web and I get it, but that's a good question. I guess my thoughts on that is that that's going to be regulated somewhat by the internet service provider, because they're going to see a huge draw on their services and say, what are you doing? And they'll probably throttle back whoever's trying to use too much of the bandwidth. So I would recommend not including that as a specific call out, since we already just say utilities in general.
Any other questions, council?
Yeah. On some of the items that we talked about earlier, like the pool, where you may have 5 or 6, and that's high, would be a high
impact.
Is there anything written on that, or is this just, what's high impact?
So high impact I'll go back to that slide that shows the definition there, and it's going to take just a minute for that screen to.
No, I read that.
So it's the definition would be anybody that's bringing in outside clients or visitors to the home, or there is one other situation where you have a contractor that's establishing.
But you mentioned that you would make a decision on that.
The process is, and I don't have the ordinance, but it is in front of you. Let me just pull up that page number.
Dave, are you just referring to the number? The number of people?
No, I'm just wondering about the number.
Who determines the number?
This is good, this is bad.
So there's two ways that would be reviewed. One would be it would be reviewed by staff. It would be an administrative determination. If the person can go through the process, get their neighbor's approval through the signature process, then that would be either myself or someone designated in the department that would review that and approve that. But doing in that process, we would be looking at some mitigating conditions. They're shown on the screen, conditions like limiting hours, limiting the number of visitors. We're going to have to look at each individual property is going to be different depending on the availability of on-street and off-street parking for that property. So there is some discretion given to staff in that case. If they can't get those signatures, or if a neighbor is concerned, they could kick this to a conditional use process through the Planning Commission, and then they'd still review those same things. But one thing to keep in mind is that a conditional use permit is an allowed use. So we're not questioning whether or not the use is allowed. We're questioning what types of conditions do we need to add. And that could be, hey, we looked at your street. There's only room for 4 cars. You can't have more than 4 people there for your lesson, or whatever the case may be. Okay. Or it might be something where, particularly with daycares, this is something that we look at already, which is, okay, how are you safely going to get the kids in and out of your house? And is there an area for that to occur that's safe and that doesn't require someone to, walk across streets, a busy street or whatever? So that type of review is already occurring with some of these. It actually kicks the review up a little bit, because right now there is no high impact home occupation. So it gives us a little bit more review authority than what we have right now.
So it's not based on emotion?
No, we hope not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
unless you really get emotional about swimming lessons, I guess, but I don't.
If it's not all drawn out, I wonder, sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's fine. Good.
Any other questions?
Oh, sorry, Mayor.
No, you're fine.
No, not so much a question. Just I appreciate the discussion and kind of having it go from the council. And I read all through the Planning Commission's discussions. Commissioner Nelson's here, so thanks for all your work on this. And Councilman Morris, I think you were pretty instrumental in trying to get some of this language the way it should be as well. So, we're trying to. The pandemic's kind of flatten the world a little bit, and American Dream starts in people's garages a lot of times. We want to try to make sure that we can facilitate that, but it also continues. People have their businesses that don't just start there. They might stay there if they're a consultant or a single lawyer who just does transactional work. I know a lot of lawyers who work at home, and being able to have a client in here or there will help their business. So I appreciate the flexibility that we've written in here, and I think it helps keep the residential feel, but allows us to be able to try to help people if they want to try to make something of themselves, either as a primary function of their employment, or if they want to make some extra money on the side in a secondary income, that we've tried to facilitate that. So I think this is exactly how we should be doing it, with input from all the council members and the community and from the folks of the Planning Commission and then the staff. So I think this is just been done just perfectly. So Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, council, this is a public hearing, so I need somebody to open the meeting then and see if there's take any public comment.
I move we open the meeting to take public comment.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Would anyone in the audience care to comment on our public hearing? Okay, Gary, I just want to verify, was there anything at all sent in? So it's something you could answer then, or take care of? Okay. Okay, well, means that there's no comments regarding our municipal code amendment. I'll look for action then by the council. Anybody care to close the public meeting and take action?
Madam Mayor, I move that we close the public meeting, or the public hearing, and adopt ordinance 20-39, amending the Layton Municipal Code, Title 19 zoning, Chapter 1902 definitions, Chapter 1906 land use regulations, and Section 19.06.030 home occupation.
Second. Okay, it's been moved in second. I'll take a roll call vote on this. So I'll start out with Councilmember Thomas.
Aye.
Councilmember Morris.
Aye.
Councilmember Fitzpatrick.
Aye.
Councilmember Bloxham.
Aye.
Councilmember Day.
Yes.
Okay, there you have it. It passes unanimous. Okay, that concludes the public hearing. So now we're down to just the last and final item. Is the council, do any of you have any unfinished business you'd like to bring before me?
I have, go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think the ho 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 wins.
Okay, ho 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 says, it's that time of year for Sub for Santa. So for those of you that don't want coal in your stockings, talk to the Sub for Santa guy after.
For a
you.
donation.
And it requires no second.
Okay, I have two things. Alex, I guess you're the one. This mic over here, can we have a look at that? Because I've sat in the planning commission meetings back there. I've had multiple complaints. It just doesn't seem to be working very good. And get it so people can hear. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And then one last thing is following up to some discussion from a few months ago on the Smith's truck problem. It was reported back to me today from the Randalls down there. They're still experiencing the same problems. Backed up trucks all over. In fact, he said that he's losing sales of diesel at night because they're pulling right in his fuel islands and sleeping. And he had somebody even comment just this past week that he came in to buy fuel, but he couldn't get to it because they're parking in there. He's having problems with them, even going off the road across his grass to get around the trucks. And I was just wondering, Alex, if you guys have had any discussions with Smith since we discussed it a few months ago or anything. Yeah, it's just a continual problem, and it's just not fair for the businesses down there. He said one night, or that the police were there even closing one road off because they couldn't get down there because of the trucks. I'm not sure exactly what that entailed, but if we could just follow up on that. I don't know what brought the police down there that time. His comment to me was, we can't be here after hours, police our own properties and stuff, and so it's difficult for us to keep them out of the islands to fuel and all, and off the lawns and all that. So I don't know if we need to take a little bit more police presence there or what, or I mean, it's a difficult situation. I don't know the answer, but I think there needs to be some kind of a better answer for those people that are down there. And I haven't been by, usually I'm by there a lot in the summer farming out there, but recently I haven't, and so it's just the same as it's been.
And not only that, but during the day, I've gone on that road a couple of times, and they've been illegally parked in the red zones, kind of by where the All Care Auto is. And one of the times they were kind of into their exit area. And so it's not just the nighttime that seems to be, the nighttime is by far the worst because they're lined up. When I leave here and go home, it's a gamble whether or not I can get around. So I think the nighttime enforcement would be a bigger issue than the daytime, but they're doing it a lot of the time.
Okay, I know that's the second time that's been brought up, so who's going to take, who wants to take the lead on that, on making sure that we kind of really let them know how critical this is? Is that something Chad would do, or? Yeah, it keeps reoccurring, and I know you got to constantly talk to them, but. Yeah. Much impact. Okay. Oh, they are. Well, if we're gonna, I know last time we talked about the speeding, and I kind of said, yeah, go ahead and enforce that. And I think the same goes here, because certainly in the trucker world, once you really start writing those tickets, I know the word will get out. So that's what we've got to do to try a different action in mitigating this problem. Then I would support that. So.
I would agree with you, Alex. I think the enforcement is probably about the only option you have now. So. And one of the big problems is there's no turning lane. If they were in a middle turning lane and there was traffic on both sides, but they park right in the lane and block.
Yeah, they do.
From both directions. So thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, you think about how many people they employ here, and obviously a lot of those folks live here in our city. So, yeah, we don't want to cause any issues that way. But I think truck, like I said, maybe just do the enforcement and let the word spread. Let them.
Well, you hope the best because a lot of those truckers, they don't come here all the time. Yeah, I mean,
Okay, the word will
so I
spread.
mean,
Yeah.
you get a lot of new guys and new things. The one thing, if you're looking at enforcement, there was a weird one on, what road is that?
Sugar
No. Hillfield Road.
Hillfield Road that goes
Hillfield
east
Road.
and west.
He was parked right up against the train track, which there wasn't a red line, but it just was weird because I pulled up and there was a train coming that hadn't come down yet. But anyway, it was just interesting that they're starting. I mean, I'm not going to blame them. They're trying to find a place to park and they'll do whatever they can and, so they can get out in the morning and do it. But yeah, we're going to have to do something.
Okay. Anything else? Any other unfinished business? Very good. Well, I'd say we can wrap this meeting up then. Is there a
I
motion
move
to
we
adjourn?
wrap this meeting up then.
Wrap as in Christmas wrap.
And I'll second.
Okay, thank you, you guys. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone, enjoys their holidays the best they can here.